All right, welcome everybody to another town hall, YOM Town Hall. People who don't know, YOM is a DePIN network that is solely focused on delivering AAA quality games to any device anywhere in the world via URL. Tausif, I don't know if you saw, we've got this running inside Telegram now. We get some pretty exciting. The technology is just getting better and better as we build up. But I'm joined today by Tausif Ahmed. He is the. Let me make sure I get all these information correct. So Tausif is the chief business development business development officer at IO.net, where he leads all functions related to sales and revenue, supply management, and Web2 and Web3 partnerships. If everyone doesn't know, IO.net is the leading decentralized GPU network aimed at serving flexible and cost-effective compute to AI, to ML, startups, and enterprises globally. And prior to joining IO.net, Tausif led business development at Kraken and also held several roles across strategic partnerships. And then you did BD at Amazon, AWS, and also Deloitte. Oddly enough, I have a family member who actually works at Deloitte still. He's been working there for many, many years. Interesting. One of these days I'm going to drop your name on him. But how are you doing, Tausif? How's it going today? It's a big day for the whole Web3 community, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Really exciting day to have this conversation. Yeah, things are great on our side. Excited to be on here again. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, yeah. So we met you guys. I was going through. We were just talking before we get started. We met you guys in Dubai when we went out there for Token 2049, and it was a great story. And we're going to go into that in a little bit. But if you want to give people, I just went through a little bit of a bio. But if you want to go and give people a little bit more background about how you got started in the Web3 space, how you get started with IO.net, I'd like to hear a little bit of like the origin story for everybody because it's always something different for everybody.
Sure, happy to talk about that. So my personal crypto Web3 journey started back in 2017 during that whole bull run that happened then. Kind of read the Bitcoin white paper, kind of read the Ethereum white paper, got fully sort of like orange pilled and, got really, really into blockchain and had my mind blown by sort of all the possibilities of like decentralized distributed ledger technology. Wanted to work in the space personally back then, but obviously everything blew up by the time I got around to trying to do that. So ended up actually going to AWS at the time, which was really great because I kind of saw everything that blockchain was meant to solve for and was doing, but how it looked like in a very centralized fashion. So things like compute, storage, networking, CDNs, like VPNs, all these things, all these different services that AWS sort of sells. I kind of saw what it looks like when it's done in sort of like a very like centralized, efficient manner, and it kind of also opened my eyes to sort of like the market power that someone like AWS has. Right, I think within the first couple months that I was at AWS, one of our major services, S3, happened to go down, and then it was on the news saying that a third of the entire internet went down with it, which is kind of really crazy to think about how much sort of like that single point of failure had. So that kind of really, you know, opened my eyes to sort of why decentralization really mattered even more and why like blockchain was such an important technology. So I jumped into Web3 professionally back in like 2021, 2022, leading BD at Kraken. Obviously a great place to work, like really, really smart folks over there. Got a really great view of the overall Web3 industry, but I wanted to be even closer to where the action was and where the innovation was happening. So I started to take a look out around a variety of different sectors and companies and projects within Web3. And specifically the DePIN sector kind of stood out to me a lot while doing my research. I think a lot of people kind of constantly ask about, at least like the normies always ask about like, when you say you work in like Web3, it's like, hey, well, what's the use case of crypto, right? And I think DePIN was one of those use cases where I realized it's like, oh, this is actually a use case where Web3 and blockchain technology uniquely enables solving a real world like Web2 use case. And I think the structural sort of like benefits of using DePIN technologies kind of really, really stand out from being able to do that and offer a benefit to customers. So all that to say, kind of realized DePIN was something that was super exciting with real world application possibilities. And it was at the same time that sort of the AI and ML and, was starting to take off. ChatGPT was having its moment, and then the GPU shortage was really sort of like a critical, supply chain shortage that was really limiting AI ML innovation. So I kind of came across IONET, realized that it was sort of this marriage of, kind of using DePIN and blockchain to solve the GPU shortage, and kind of applied a lot of sort of what I learned during my time at AWS, and ended up jumping ship to join here.
We're going to have to talk a little bit about, the test that we ran out of AWS over to here, and we'll get that in a second. But and you know what else we want to talk about here too? I think your journey is a good one, similar to mine in some ways. But anybody who's listening in who's like, gee, I work a different I work Web 2 job. I want to get into Web 3 because I'm already trading cryptos. I understand the space. How do I make that transition? So we should try to hit on some hints for that as well. But
Sure.
Starting at the very beginning, when we talk about DePIN, I have to explain it to people, nobody's around me, like as you say, who don't understand. They understand a little bit of blockchain. They've heard of Bitcoin, but they don't really understand what a DePIN is. When you have to explain DePIN to people, what's the easiest way to explain it to people? Because I'm with you. We also say the same thing, that DePIN is really the use case that we've been waiting for in the blockchain space. Past DeFi, DePIN is where it's going to go next. But how do you explain DePINs to people?
Yeah, it's kind of always like analogies are always like the best way to do this, right? And I think like DePINs, like we're lucky in that we're like very skeuomorphic to sort of like a business model that already exists in Web 2, right? So when I often talk about IONET, one of the easiest ways to kind of just like tell people what it's about, it's like essentially saying, hey, we're the Airbnb of GPUs. And essentially people kind of always have that aha moment of like, oh, okay, now I get it. Because at the end of the day, what we're doing is, we're a two-sided marketplace, but essentially what we're doing is we're taking like latent compute capacity that exists out there, offering a platform or a network to be able to coordinate it, cluster it together, and then make it easy for people who actually need that compute to be able to access it, right? Like very similar to how Airbnb was just solving like the travel and like hotel availability issue, right? For travelers everywhere, like they realized that, hey, there's a bunch of space out there that just is unused, but there's no platform actually being able to like coordinate all that and offer it up in a front end that any traveler who wants to go to a new city can just like look at what the options are and then decide it as like a potentially cheaper, more flexible alternative to hotels. So I think it's like very similar in terms of how like DePINs work, right? So IONET in particular is focused on applying that DePIN framework to GPUs, but very similarly, there's a lot of other like exciting projects in the space. Like Filecoin has been doing this for a while, specifically with storage. I think projects like Helium have been doing it with sort of like telecom networks, HiveMapper with, like mapping networks, things like that. And, in some ways, I would actually argue that all blockchains are fundamentally DePINs, right? Because even if you think about like Bitcoin, right, what it's doing is basically coordinating like compute and mining resources globally to essentially solve its like hashing algorithm, right? So it's like making all these people who have these miners sort of like spread out everywhere, pool their compute power together to solve like the Bitcoin proof of work algorithm. So in a way, it's kind of, and even Ethereum, right? They call it sort of like the world computer because it's sort of like coordinating these like decentralized like compute resources to run the EVM. So I think in a way, like all blockchains are DePINs, but I think with the stuff that we're doing at IONET and even what you guys are doing at YOM, it sort of makes it a little bit more tangible of like coordinating physical resources for like different use cases and real world problems.
Right. And we've been saying this a lot now lately with our pitches, and when we talk to other people in the community. What we're saying is for YOM's case, cloud gaming, it's been around for a while, but it's hampered by the idea that the GPUs, well, two things really. The central servers like Amazon, and I get your take on this too, right? They the way that they're architected, there's so many layers that the game has to get out from where it's serving inside of Amazon out to the pipeline that gets out to the end user. So the distance, those layers slow down the signal, right? So it adds latency to the game. One of the I don't know if you heard about this. We haven't told you this yet, but one of the tests that we ran, we have a sample game running on our closed alpha network. They have it running at one of our on a node at a computer at one of our devs' houses in Amsterdam. Like it's just running inside of his house on a gaming computer, and they're passing the link around to the tech group, to themselves, all in the Amsterdam. They were checking to see if the Amsterdam office could reach out to his computer at his house. And I saw the link and I hit it. and started playing the game. And I had I'm in the States, right? I'm over here in South Carolina. And I was able to play the game with, no real latency. I played the game off of his computer in Amsterdam, and we were, because it's just a peer-to-peer connection. When I told the tech team this, they were like, but when we tried to run it from the Amazon server in Amsterdam out to New York, I was in New York for a conference. It just didn't work. Latency was horrible. But what we discovered is inside of Amazon, apparently there are all these different layers that you have to get the signal out to, and that slows it down. So maybe a central server in Amsterdam could still hit, or I think the server we're running in Ireland might be able to hit all of the UK, but generally can't go out much past that. But for us to play a node from Amsterdam to me in South Carolina was kind of mind blowing. So when you hear that, does that surprise you, as you've been inside of AWS? Does that surprise you that the signal is slowed down so much when it comes outside of a central server like that?
Yeah, yeah. I think it doesn't surprise me now because of sort of like the alternatives that we've been building in terms of like, like decentralized networks and DePINs and, like even like CDNs, right? Like with AWS, like, yeah, of course, you're going to get like a fully managed service that's, fully taken care of and everything like that. That's like fully integrated. But in reality, when you're kind of really trying to optimize for latency, you're going to run into this issue, right? Where it's like, hey, AWS has all of its like major data centers that are literally like, giant physical locations spread out all over the world, but like still, they're not going to be as spread out as like a decentralized or distributed compute network, right? It's like they're going to throw in like hundreds of thousands of like GPUs and like storage disks and things like that, but it's all going to be in like a data center, and everything will have to flow through that data center to be like sort of
Right.
have that like centralized control. So yeah, when you kind of like compare it side by side against using kind of like a distributed network, like where the end user is being served by a node that's like a lot closer, like you start like physics is just on your side, right? Like at a certain point, like you just can't beat the speed of light. And then, when you literally displace the end user and like the compute node serving it like so close together, like you're automatically going to have an advantage.
Right, right. And then the other thing that we talk about too is with all the AI needs, all the GPU needs of AI, and all these data centers, they're cloud gaming is now competing for those GPU cycles. So it's only going to cause the price of GPU cycles to go up because AI is trying to suck in as much of it as possible. So an alternative like what we're offering, and with your help, right, we can get GPU costs back down again so that game developers can actually afford to have their game on a cloud and spread it around as easy as, what cloud gaming does. So two big talking points that we're excited about. All right, so we've already run a test on IO.net. Like we know that the system works for us. So the next part's about no delegation. So let's talk. I guess we talk a little bit about how does the system work? How does IO.net work as a system? What do people do? For us, we're making licenses available to delegate over to IO.net. But that's a large part of the business model for IO.net. Am I right?
Yeah. So it's a couple different ways that we work, right? So I think first and foremost, yeah, like we're started specifically with the intention of serving sort of like AI/ML developers, startups, enterprises for like use cases like model training, inference, fine tuning, things like that. So yeah, our business model primarily is focused on solving sort of like these AI/ML use cases, essentially offering up like enterprise grade GPUs like H100s, A100s, L40Ss, which are sort of almost like custom built for model training, fine tuning, things like that, and being able to serve it to sort of like consumer or B2B apps that need it for those purposes. So anyone who's an AI/ML developer essentially can just come on to our platform, deploy a GPU cluster in the location or the type of GPU for however long they need, and you get set up in terms of within like a couple minutes in terms of being able to start accessing it and start using it, just in terms of like whether it's like a ray cluster or bare metal or things like that. So that's kind of what our like primary business is. But I think like what you touched on with no delegation is sort of like another side of our business that's sort of expanding even more and more. And especially it kind of comes very closely to, because we're have our roots in Web3 and work with a lot of like Web3 partners, who obviously have sort of like blockchain solutions that have like like nodes and validators and things that things that you need to kind of like further strengthen and like decentralize for the distribution of the network. So part of that is essentially us being able to offer up a solution of we call almost like container as a service, right? Where companies like YOM can essentially just sort of, delegate a node or essentially run their like Docker container on IONET GPUs. And, can either do it through like a first party way where it's like, obviously like YOM yourself can, run those GPU nodes like with YOM software on top and kind of have it like work exactly the way you need. But we also have with, a lot of other sort of like blockchains who actually need, decentralized set of validators. You could also like open it up to your community to be like, hey, run a, particular node for our network using like IONET GPUs, and essentially kind of open that up to your community, incentivize them to sort of like come in, participate, like reward them for that. And I think that's another area where, sort of like our compute network makes a lot of sense with existing Web3 projects.
Yeah, we like this a lot because the idea of well, again, we've talked about the having to compete with other needs for GPU resources against these big central servers, but then we also know that the prediction is that like 100 times more databases has to be built in order to handle the coming AI needs, right? So that's 100 times more massive buildings with the environmental impacts and the cost for running and the air conditioning costs and all these things are going to be massive. But we like and then what comes with all that is centralizing the revenue to somebody who can own one of these big buildings, right? And that leaves all the money going to like guys who've already got a whole bunch of money. But your project, our project, what we're talking about is being able to decentralize revenue, so that people can sell their idle GPUs cycles to a network like yours or a network like ours that allows them to earn some money passively, because they've got the equipment, but they're not using it at the moment, right? And that's I think that for me, anyways, I don't know how you felt about that. Maybe you touched a little bit of it, but to me, that was the exciting part when it kind of dawned on me that, oh, we can put money into local economies through people who are living in far-flung places. I think that's super powerful for me.
Yeah, I think that's like a really, really important topic, right? And I actually really love talking about this because I think like people talk about this idea of like the compute economy, but I think it means a lot of different things for different people. But I think what you just touched upon is sort of at like the heart of what I think it means, and I think what it will come to mean for a lot of people. Because if you kind of think about the narrative around AI and sort of like the rise of AI over the past couple of years, like obviously it's been super innovative and amazing, and people have been wowed by it. But there's also a lot of fear around it, right? Like a lot of people who've essentially been really worried about like what this means for like themselves, like their jobs, like their ability to earn, and like essentially getting displaced, right? Like they might have spent their whole life in their career, and all of a sudden ChatGPT came out, and everything that they were able to perform now can just be done, like for like a $20 a month subscription. So I think it has a lot of people like really worried about it. And I don't think those fears are unfounded, right? Like I think we will probably enter a period of time, or we're entering a period of time where there's going to be a lot of like mass upheaval of just like what it means to be part of the labor force, what it means to, we're talking about like universal basic income and things like that. And I think like when I think about the compute economy, I kind of like think of it as this like opportunity for people to, essentially offer up like whatever sort of like compute that they will have, like just in their day to day, right? Like whether it's your phone, whether it's your laptop, whether it's, like your own little like GPU server at home that you just like tinker together. Or like I kind of think, people sort of think of those devices as your, like typical compute sources, but realistically, a lot of things around us in our home and like things we use in our day to day also have some form of compute, right? Like literally like your smart fridge or your TV or like even your Tesla. It's like those actually also have like compute chips. And potentially could get powerful enough, or the technologies to cluster together those like tinier compute sources could get like advanced enough where they could meaningfully be used in like running compute workloads, especially with like distributed training. Research gets to that point. So I think that starts to become like, hey, a lot of these people who feel like they're going to get like displaced by AI, like this sort of becomes like a opportunity for them to kind of continue to create wealth, continue to earn by essentially continuing to participate in being able to provide, the compute power for like AI or ML or gaming or sort of whatever compute is needed for, right? So I think in terms of just like value creation and capture, the mechanics and dynamics are going to change a lot. But I think a lot of people will kind of continue to participate in the compute economy, like just by the factor of like, things that they use day to day and like just being able to make that available when they're not using it.
What we're finding is that a lot of people who are in the gaming space, right? They built their last gaming machine up themselves, and it's got a little bit outdated. So when they went out and bought a new one, and they've got an old one just kind of sitting in the closet, just not being used anymore. Now for us,
Yeah.
we go all the way down to a 2060, and we can handle that. That can handle two games concurrently, but up to the 4090, which can handle 8. So there are people who have got 3060s, 3090s are sitting around their closet saying, okay, now I've got this machine that's not really doing anything, but I can turn it on 24/7, act as a node, and I'm up and running. The people who are in that situation, they can also sell those cycles into IO.net. Am I right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think, yeah, that's sort of like the other aspect of where a lot of our supply comes from, right? Like we, of course, work with a ton of like independent data centers to get like a lot of those like enterprise level grade GPUs
Mhm.
into our network. But then we start to go further down the stack where we work with a lot of like crypto projects and former crypto miners also to get their devices into our sort of supply network. And then sort of like the lowest but the largest there is kind of the community, right? Where anyone with a 4090, 3090, like 20XX cards can like basically come on, provide their GPUs to IONET, whether that's the 1Z, 2Z, whatever they may have, and essentially participate in our network, be able to offer that up, and anyone out there, like so like this use case is really great for IONET too, right? Because we do have a lot of those type of consumer cards, which might not necessarily make the best fit for like your enterprise grade like company out there training like foundational models, but it makes a ton of sense for like cloud gaming and streaming. So I think that's been a real natural fit.
Yeah, and I didn't get to ask you before, but you a gamer? Do you have a gaming past?
um, I was a gamer. I haven't really had the time to like keep playing as much like these days, but yeah, I mean, back in the day, I was like, yeah, I have like, like an Xbox and a PlayStation 4. Still need to get the PlayStation 5, but I've always been like I was more into sort of like multiplayer games when I was like younger, like when, like Counter-Strike and like, like Warcraft 3 and Dota were
Right.
like big. But then I feel like more recently when I do have time to game, I just like really love sort of like the single player, like really like narrative driven ones. Like I think the last one I was playing was like Red Dead Redemption, and
Right.
it's
Right.
yeah, just like having like really great like sort of immersive storylines
Yeah.
are the type of
If I
games I
could,
like love.
how many times I started The Last of Us and wasn't able to get much past like 2 hours of it because I got something else happens. Come back to
Yeah,
it 2 months later, I'm like, I forgot the beginning. Play it, start from the beginning again. I must have done that like 4 times because time has just slipped away.
yeah,
Um, Got a question from somebody in the audience that's asking, like, are isn't IO.net a competitor to YOM? And it's not actually. Well, so in a way, we compete for like somebody who's got a GPU available, like we would want it, you would want it, and so that might be a little bit of a competition. But honestly, what it's more like is you are a support network for us because as we try to expand our network and we will hit retail, people who have retail machines at home, there's going to be times where the surge is too much or we're not in a certain region or just the idea of reliability for constant uptime. Someone like a company like IO.net is able to give us those things. So where we make a higher profit margin of when we have it as an individual retail person running a node, it's unreasonable to think that that's going to be our entire network. So when we first started talking to you guys, so it was funny, we were talking about this. We first met you guys at in Dubai, and we went over to your booth. It was a massive booth. It was really impressive. And as we were talking to, I forget, it was one of your founders, the CEO maybe. We were explaining what else we were building. He, while we're talking to him, he opens up his phone and starts buying some YOM tokens. And we're like, okay, I think he likes us. I think he likes this model. So that was a while back and everything. But I would say the same. I don't know if you say the same thing, but I don't think we compete because you guys aren't able to build the game distributing network. I mean, that's kind of the core of what we're building is something much more focused on delivering the game signal.
yeah, yeah. I don't think of us as competitors at all, right? Because I think like the areas of the market that we're focusing on are so different, and I think like we're obviously never really going to make a play in like cloud gaming, right? Because we understand sort of like the amount of work and complexity that has to be solved to like just solve for that use case. It's like much bigger like companies. I think we talked about this in like our previous like AMA where we were talking about Google Stadia and how they made their first attempt at streaming, and like the problem back then was it was like too hard for them to solve back then, right? So I think now we're
Right.
getting the tools and like you guys are figuring it out. But just like I don't think it's as easy to just be like, hey, like you guys are both offering compute in some form for different use cases. Like, can't you technically go after everything? But then the reality is like compute is so foundational, right? Like that it actually is like underpins like sort of any technology business realistically, and you more so in like more technology or more compute intensive businesses like gaming and AI ML and things like that. Like, so we kind of really just look at ourselves as an enabler of all the businesses like building on top, right? Like we have like I think you guys on the gaming vertical is sort of like one of the key ones, but then I think some of the other use cases that we see where we're working with a few sort of like biotech LLM projects, like that are training LLM models to do like drug discovery and protein folding and things like that, and like be like, well, technically, we could go into that market if we want to, but like, are we ever going to? Like, no, because that's not our expertise at all, right? There's way smarter people working who are spending way more time just solving that problem that we're just better served by just like enabling them rather than trying to compete.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question, Bodwin. All right, so what's next for IO.net? Where do you guys go? Is it more expansions? Is it partnering up with more infrastructure projects? What's your roadmap look like for you guys going into 2025? Now that we know that Bitcoin can actually make it over 100,000 after a few stall outs, right? I think everybody's excited about seeing the market kind of take off. But where do you see you guys in the DePIN space and then the space entirely?
Yeah, a couple different exciting things that we're working on that we've kind of like we haven't sort of like fully announced out there yet, but we've kind of teased it in a few of our AMAs. So
Okay,
it's
you
not
can tease it
like
then if you want to.
yeah. I mean, it's not even teasing it. We've like talked about it in our AMAs, so it's not like super private or anything like that. So first of all, I think we're going to be expanding our on-demand platform to support a variety of other machine learning frameworks and just like ability to sort of like serve different types of customers. So specifically right now, our on-demand platform is specifically for using sort of like ray clusters, which was the same machine learning framework that OpenAI used to train ChatGPT. So it's really powerful, but a lot of our other customers have been requesting other machine learning frameworks and just and like different ways to access GPUs as well. So we're going to be launching bare metal and Kubernetes clusters in the next like few weeks here as well, which will kind of solve a lot of the requests that our customer side has been asking for. So that's one thing on the on-demand, like just general GPU clustering side. But then I think an even more exciting thing that we're going to be launching soon is a product called IO Intelligence, which kind of is a sort of almost like a model hosting and model serving marketplace. So what that really means is we're right now, whenever someone comes to IONet, like they basically come to us to like find GPUs, they get the GPUs they need, they deploy them, and then they have to kind of manage those GPUs and build everything on top of that, right? So there's like a specific type of like highly proficient AI ML developer who's able to do that, where they can go in and manage their own infrastructure and deal with their headache. But then there's a whole sort of like much larger market of AI ML developers who actually never want to touch infrastructure, right? Like they just want to come in, they want to just like build cool AI consumer apps and kind of like play on that side of the fence without having to think about like, hey, like what GPUs do I need? How many GPUs do I need? What does the latency look like? All this stuff. Like they just want to be like, I want to build something cool with image or video generation and kind of make like a viral AI app. And I just want to tap into like Llama 3.2, like an API or like any other sort of open source model, like Stable Diffusion or something like that, and just use that as a base. So what we're going to be offering is we're going to be offering a model hosting marketplace where we'll be serving like some of the leading like open source models on Hugging Face. That'll be run on IONet GPUs, but then we'll offer up sort of like an API endpoint or an inference endpoint to essentially enable developers who are building these end consumer apps to just be able to tap into that endpoint and pay on sort of like a per inference basis, rather than having to come in and figure out the entire GPU game and then start building on top of it. So that's sort of like our way of kind of really thinking from the customer perspective and trying to abstract more of the developer experience away, right? So that they can move away from a lot of that undifferentiated, like heavy lifting to just doing what they do best, which is building AI apps.
So let me flip this at you then, because it sounds like it's some place we send work back to you. You send work to us, and we send work back at you. one of the use cases we've talked about to a couple of different partners, some of them are IP brands that have like a cartoon series, that kind of thing. The idea of, because we don't have a platform, we're not a Steam or anything like that, we can go to any URL to stream the signal off of our network. The idea of having building a character in 3D in Unreal based on an IP character, let's say, for example, you're Marvel and you want to have the Hulk on a website that people can talk to, and you can ask them questions and AI responds, the Hulk responds to those questions in real time. Like, we can get that signal, but we don't build the AI for the character to respond and to interact. But it sounds like, and again, some of the studios that we work with, they're animation studios or the game creating studios, but they also don't make AI, or they don't,
Right.
they know how to use it, but they don't. It sounds like the solution you're talking about is someplace that the game developer would come back to you and say, okay, now we have this character, we want to have this voice. Can you help us program the Hulk's, the Hulk's, mannerisms, voice responses, his history into the AI? Is that kind of what you're talking about? A simplified version for the game developer?
Yeah. So it's I think like what you're talking about is sort of like where the next layer of this would go, right? So this is kind of like the foundation of that, where we're like offering up some like standard like open source models that are just available that are applicable to like a bunch of different use cases, right? So for this Hulk sort of example that you mentioned, like we might just have kind of like a voice model or like a character model or something like that, that might be a little bit more like generic, right? Like it might just be like a generic superhero voice model or something like that,
Right.
that technically anyone could go in and just like plug into. But then on top of that, we could sort of like open up this marketplace to sort of essentially like having incentives to have people come in and be like, oh, like someone wants like a Hulk like voice model, let me kind of like quickly fine tune like an open source superhero one, train it on like I forget who played the Hulk in the Marvel movies, like was
Oh,
it Mark Ruffalo? Yeah.
yeah, Bronco Flow, right. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like train it on his voice and mannerisms from the Marvel movies, and then kind of serve that up as like, oh, here's like a Hulk mannerism voice thing that
Right.
whoever's building this, whoever's building, whatever gaming studio or developer is building this, can just be like, all right, let me just tap into that API for that particular model, like just pay on a per inference basis to this developer who did this like work for me to kind of fine tune this model to be like Hulk focused, and then they just don't have to think about anything at all. Like their game is technically AI enabled, but they didn't need to know anything about having to actually like fine tune or train models. They just tapped into
Right.
the API where that voice was served.
Nice. Yeah. Perfect. All right. So we've kind of hit we hit a good point here. Did anything that I didn't cover that you think we should get out of? Oh, we're going to talk a little bit about, hey, if you're in Web 2 and you want to get into Web 3 as a job, are there any hints there that you might throw? I haven't given this much thought myself, but what kind
Yeah.
of? But I say it all the time because every time I go to one of these conferences, right? 'Cause I don't know. Did you go to Singapore too?
I missed Singapore, but I was at like the previous ones, like Eat Denver, and like all these like consensus and all those ones. Yeah.
Yeah. When I go there, I look around and I'm like, oh my gosh, this, in the States, and again, where I live in the States in South Carolina, you don't really see a lot of blockchain stuff happening over here, but you realize that the rest of the world is really just kind of going at this full tilt. Everyone's already
Yeah.
charged up about it. And so when I see in the gaming industry right now is going through some contractions there, I see in my LinkedIn all the time people getting laid off at studios left and right, but these are traditional studios as they contract. And I keep on wanting to scream, get involved in Web3 gaming because it's getting bigger and bigger. It's got more, it had some growing pains at the beginning, but it's getting more mature. And I think, I have to keep on making that point over and over again. But it's same, I don't know, same for you that, coming from the traditional or the Web2 technology sector and getting into Web3, are you having that same feeling of, boy, I wish more people would understand that this is a place to go if your career is like stunted, and then how
Yeah.
do they get there?
Yeah. I think like obviously there's still sort of like that like stigma associated with kind of like Web3 and crypto in a lot of sort of like like mainstream folks' minds who are like in the Web2 world and have just
Right.
heard about things like FTX and Celsius and just don't want to deal with anything like that. So I think what will kind of tend to happen now, I think, especially with Bitcoin above 100K, I think, like interest in the space will continue to get renewed. And I think like a lot more people will start being like, oh, like, let me go check this out and see what kind of cool stuff they're building there now. And the reality is like, we've been building cool stuff in Web3 like forever, right? Like whether it's a bull market, whether it's a bear market, like, builders like build and kind of constantly try to solve like cool problems. Um, So I think for me, like what really worked for me in terms of kind of making that switch from Web 2 to Web 3, I think it depends on sort of like what layer you want to go into, right? So it's like I think for me, jumping into Kraken, Kraken's almost like it's kind of like a Web 2 business that touches Web 3, right? Because it's like infrastructure for buying like tokens and things like that. So for that, it was very much sort of like a more of like a you know, proper tech recruiting job process like LinkedIn, all that stuff, right? Which is like
Right.
way more like normal. But I think if you want to, jump into sort of like more of these like exciting projects that are actually building on the blockchain, like really kind of doing like cool stuff in new innovative spaces in Web3, I think there's a couple different ways, right? I think like being on Twitter is pretty underrated because I think you kind of have to just like be part of the dialogue there, just like have a presence there, start like just finding like the people who talk about interesting stuff, like, and actually not feel afraid to like reach out to them and just DM them. I think one thing that really struck me a lot kind of trying to jump into like Web3 was, when you're in Web2 and you're trying to like reach out to just whatever VP or C-suite at like, these other bigger companies, they're typically really hard to get in touch with because their like inboxes are like constantly inundated with stuff. And, they just kind of like glaze over a lot of these things. But with Web3 founders, like I've actually literally just been able to like DM people on Twitter who I thought were like, just going to be way too busy to ever talk to like a random nobody, like, like at the time who I like had no name in Web3,
You,
and they actually
you know,
responded.
you're filling up our DMs right now. Right now, everyone's going to hit both our DMs, thinking, "Oh, these guys just said it was very easy to reach out."
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, of course, don't make your messages like spammy, right? Like, just copy paste stuff. Like, you have to be like a little more sort of like thoughtful about what your approach is, and you'll get,
Sure.
and even if you get on a call with someone, it's like, yeah, you have like 20 minutes to really like make an impression, so you have to make it count. It's just
Right.
a foot in the door. So I think that was really key, and I think the other part, like, you touched on like conferences. I think that was like super super key too, like, because even though we're all like terminally online and are kind of like spread out all over the world, I think like people in Web3 sort of really appreciate conferences just because it gives people an opportunity to kind of like finally come together in person and like see everyone in person, because we don't really get to do that a lot. So
True.
actually just showing up and like showing your face and like at a lot of these like side events of the conference, like going to these booths, like just talking to people kind of goes a long way towards building those connections. Because I think like one good face-to-face interaction at a conference is worth like 1,000 DMs or cold approaches or like resume submissions and things like that. So I think that's super important. And like the last point I'll mention is I think the real alpha is actually at sort of like hacker houses and hackathons. Like if you have the time to kind of go and do that, like just going to sort of like a place where a bunch of like devs for like a particular blockchain or project get together and are like hacking projects together, I think was is one of the best. Like I think last February I went to this one called Mountain DAO for Solana that happens in Salt Lake City. And it happens for like the whole month, but I just went for kind of like first week, and it's just a bunch of people, like, well, I think it was almost like 50 to 100 people or something getting together in a WeWork, and all just working on their respective like Solana projects, and everyone's just talking and sharing notes, and just sharing alpha and talking about like like what they're building. So I think that was like a really really great way to build a lot of like in-depth connections with people that ended up being like really fruitful. So so buy that conference ticket, get on that play, and I think if you have the time, it's really really worthwhile if you're serious
Yeah.
about jumping to the Web3.
I'll throw in there that the smaller conferences are a little bit easier to meet and greet people than the larger conferences. But even the larger conferences, like I said, by the time I went to Singapore, I ran into people that I run to three times already at different conferences, earlier in the year, and it was like, oh, you again, and the conferences get easier and easier to run into each other more often. And the other thing I would add too is being involved in a community. Like pick the one or two projects that you really can get behind, you can understand very well, and be an active part of their community. That's a good way to eventually become a community mod, and then move up from there too. That's a good way to get yourself seen. I've seen a couple of people will make the transition that way.
For sure.
Right, Tausif, I think we did good. I feel like it was good talking to you again. It's been a little while. I think our tech team's reaching out to your tech team again too, so we're going to get some more of those conversations going. But anything I should touch on last call, or we'll go ahead and let everybody get back to their day?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground here. Yeah, thanks once again for having me. It was a great conversation. So happy to be here.
All right, man. Thanks again. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We're gonna, you'll see small clips of this. I'll prepare those over the weekend. So we'll do the long video will be up, and there'll be smaller versions of it up as well. But great conversation, man. I really appreciate it.